Hi, and welcome to the Low No Drinker podcast, the companion podcast to Low No Drinker magazine, the #1 UK magazine for the sober curious drinker. This podcast is all about bringing you the people behind the brands who are leading the low and no alcohol revolution. In it, I'll be interviewing brand founders and industry pioneers who are all on a mission to help you live a life less intoxicated. Plus, I'll be sprinkling in some of my own thoughts and insights as the founder and editor of the magazine. So, let's get started with this week's guest. Hi, and welcome. Today I am speaking to the lovely Jason Clark, one of the founders behind Genius Brewing, the 3% brand. And when I met Jason a few months ago, I knew that he was somebody I wanted to get on to speak to me and to everybody and share his enthusiasm for the sector. But before we get to all that, Jason, first of all, thanks for joining me. And secondly, can you take me back to the beginning, wherever you feel comfortable to start, and tell me a little bit about your backstory and how you came to start Genius with your co-founder, Charlie?
Thanks so much, Denise. Thanks for having me and giving us the opportunity to talk about the low and no space, the healthier drinking trend, and what we're doing to serve that customer at Genius Brewing. It was back in 2016, I think, in my previous life as a filmmaker. And it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was in the pub, as you can do when you're a filmmaker. And I was looking to do some work, but I really fancied a beer because I knew I'd be there for a couple of hours. I fancied it. Can't be in a pub and not have beer. And so I thought, I fancy a pint, but obviously I want to do some work and I might be driving a bit later on. So I don't want a full bat, beer, but I equally didn't want a no alcohol beer either, especially back in 2016 when really there wasn't much on offer. And I looked at the offering in this, quite a big pub, and I thought, why isn't there something around about 3% that tastes great, that is just giving me that little bit of that beer experience, but with, not all the booze. And there was just nothing there. And that was just a kind of personal trigger to, my own potential customer demand kind of thing. So that was the first thought. But then that got me thinking a bit more wider about the whole beer space. And at that point in my life, I was nothing more than an enthusiastic consumer of beer and no background in beer business or brewing at all. And I wouldn't say I was a sort of aficionado, sort of camera member sort of thing at all. But maybe the sort of eureka moment I think I had back then was that the wider health trends that we were seeing in our everyday life in terms of exercise, diet, or the sort of wellness mindset that was changing the way we exercise and eat, etc. I thought that's going to come to affect the way we think about alcohol. Now, back in 2016, craft beer was going like a train, going really well. Brewdog were in the vanguard of that. And there was definitely a trend of making beers stronger and stronger and stronger. It's almost like an arms race of who can make the strongest double IPA kind of beer. And I felt that I was looking the wrong way for two reasons. Firstly, you could only travel so far down that road. No one's going to drink a 15% IPA. But also I thought all the other behavioral changes around health were going the other way, less fat, less sugar, less salt, less calories. And I thought over the longer term, this is where the beer industry, particularly craft beer, needs to be going to meet the changing needs of the customer. And that was really the sort of spark that began the Genius Brewing journey.
And tell me, when did Charlie and you get together on this? And when did you two meet, or how did you meet?
Well, it's funny how life goes in these sort of circles. Charlie and I met at university 35 years ago. And I've been friends ever since, but our lives went in completely different professional routes. And when I'd had this idea, like this, not necessarily, I didn't have the brand or anything, or even the product, it was just this idea that I thought, this demand would come. Charlie was the only person I knew in the beer business. He'd been at Fine Ales up in Scotland for the past 10 years then. And I called him and I said, this is in my mind. Why is this kind of beer not out there? Is there a technical problem or obstacle that prevents people from creating a great 3% beer, for instance? Why is this not happening? So we talked about it and then decided to just do our own thing a little bit. Charlie was involved with the business. I had a digital media production company in Scotland at that time, so I was very busy with that. But we spent about the next 6 months just exploring the concept. He looked at the technical. He went to speak to lots of brewers. I did a lot of brand research, market research, not just in the UK, but around the world, what was happening in that space. And over the period of about, I think probably maybe 6 months, we both kind of came back together and had two realizations. Firstly, technically, it could be done. We could make a really great 3% beer. It just wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't be cheap. You'd have to use the absolutely top quality ingredients to balance out the lower ABV. And from my research, I was even more convinced that the opportunity in the market was not there yet, but was going to come. That healthier drinking, as we were using that phrase, was going to become a part of the landscape going forward. And so we pretty much realized, right, then, let's do this.
You mentioned there that you realized it wasn't going to be easy. What sort of challenges do you face bringing a 3% lager or ale to the market that are different from, say, a 0 or 0.5 versus obviously a full strength?
I'm glad you mentioned the zero space because that's proved in our first years, because we're 5 years old now, having launched in 2018, to be our biggest hurdle. In 2018, the zero space was pretty unpopulated out by Beck's Blue, which no comment. But that space went on fire. Loads of new brands came in offering, vastly improved products. The bigger brewers then came into the space, improving their products or making much better versions of what you'd imagine of their 0% kind of mother brands. And the low and no space really took off, isn't it? It's been absolutely on fire for the last 5 years. And understandably so, because it does in some ways meet a moderation need, and there's a hugely improved range of products for the consumer. So because that space was so hot, no one was really thinking about anything other than that space in terms of health. So if you had the words beer and health in one sentence, the third phrase was no alcohol beer. And we just didn't fit that paradigm. I think back then, low and no, the phrase was the phrase that the industry had adopted. And we'll come on to talk about the challenges of that later. But that confused everyone at the time because it sounded like two different products. There were low alcohol products and no alcohol products. And we kind of thought of ourselves really as a kind of a no alcohol product. But that became clear that as regulation specified that no alcohol had to be 1.2% or below, that we didn't fit that category. And actually there were almost no products in the 1% space because, what is a 1% beer? So actually low and no became the no alcohol space in terms of the products, but it was still called low and no in the trade and in retail, which was confusing everybody. So we didn't fit anywhere. We didn't fit in that low and no space. We were seen as being lower alcohol to what was then still a full fat craft space, 6% ABV IPAs, etc. So we didn't really fit anywhere. And that was a real commercial problem for the business in the early days. But the industry didn't know where to put us. They didn't know what to benchmark us against. But that is changing now. We're seeing the light beer space, lower alcohol space now, I think really becoming the next interesting space.
Yeah, there's a few more coming through, aren't there? There are, brands sort of like your imposter brews and your small beers who are introducing or bringing through lower, as you say. But it is very confusing, isn't it? Because the average ABV of a beer or a lager in the UK is about 5 to 5.5%. So a 3% drink is low alcohol, comparatively speaking, but it's not the technical 1.2 low alcohol, which isn't even a law, it's just guidance.
Exactly. I mean, when we talk to consumers, they think of Genius as a low alcohol beer. As you say, they think 3%, especially in the craft space, is relatively low alcohol. But so that's right for them, but they don't understand why therefore it's not in the low and no aisle in Sainsbury's because it's just no alcohol beers there. So I think there's work to be done in the industry around regulation, phraseology. We advocate getting rid of low and no completely. It's just completely confusing and it's breaking it apart into no alcohol products and low alcohol products, or what we would actually rather call light beer. Because two reasons for that. The health agenda is not just around alcohol. I mean, one of the things we've discovered on the journey with Genius Brewing is that the low calories of our product is just as attractive as the lower alcohol. I have to say, when we started, calories weren't really at the forefront of our kind of proposition. It was around the ABV, but we quickly realized once we were producing a 79 calorie and 89 calorie lager, the consumers latched onto that really quickly. And we realized that actually the health agenda in the alcohol space is around alcohol and calories. So we
Mhm.
think light is a much better definition of a healthier product because the consumers are familiar with that phrase from shopping, from, light margarine, any of these products that light means less of the bad stuff. And I think consumers really understand that. And of course, anyone who's been to America is really familiar with light beer, when light beer is ubiquitous in the States. So I'm hoping that over time we see this change in regulation, kind of nomenclature. We get rid of the confusion around low and no. Uh, no alcohol is no alcohol. Now I know there's going to be debate in there. Is it 0.5? Is it 0.0? And that's a tricky one. Philosophically, I think I would say 0.0 should be the threshold if it's got no alcohol in it.
Mhm.
But I do understand the arguments around the physiological effect that 0.5 is less alcohol than a ripe banana. So I do think there's a challenge in there for regulation. That's not our particular area. But I would like to see this light, lower ABV space more clearly specified in regulation, in ASA rules, for instance, so that consumers can understand there's this space that is right for them, that we've got no alcohol, we've got what we call full fat beer, but there's a space in the middle for healthier options, which is lighter, lighter on alcohol, lighter on calories.
So I believe that there is more consultation happening within the next couple of months. Um, the the Department of Health and Social Services are having a second talk about the naming of drinks in this space.
So I hear, which
Follow,
is sounds encouraging, hopefully.
yeah, I believe that the one of the big movers in there, the WSTA, who recently launched their guide on what they think uh, the naming and the advice and the guidance should be around it. And I believe they're campaigning for low alcohol, alcohol free now to be zero point 0.5 across all of the UK to match up with Europe and the US. But I also know that there are a lot of people who do agree with you and think that low alcohol should be just 0.0. It should just have no alcohol in it whatsoever.
What attracts me to that is the simplicity of that. You say something is alcohol free, it's no alcohol. It's got no alcohol in it, none at all.
Mm.
So if someone said to me, here's a sugar free soft drink, I would expect it to have 0 grams of sugar in it.
Mhm.
If it's got 0.1, of course, that's next to nothing, but it's not 0. So that's probably where my sympathies lie, especially for the consumer in terms of understanding what they're getting. But equally as a
Mhm.
brewer, I do understand there's lots of small brewers who are producing 0.5s out there because they can't afford the massive de-alkalization kit you need to have to go to 0.0. It's no surprise the likes of Guinness, Heineken are leading on 0.0 because they've got the scale to de-alkalize. So my sympathies with those small producers who will face that challenge.
Speaking of brewing and techniques, can you tell me a little bit about the beers? Because it'd be great to know. I've got a couple of them up here. So you've got, I believe, a lager and an ale. Fantastic.
Yep, we do.
So,
There's our craft lager, our IPA. We started with a craft lager back in 2018, which in hindsight probably didn't make life easy for us. We should have really started with an IPA. When we began the business, we made 3 big calls, 2 of which we got right. So one of which we got right at the time, 2 you could argue we got wrong. The one we got right was the move towards lower ABVs, lower calorie, healthier drinking. That is definitely playing out now. We also thought we were probably guilty of looking over the horizon a bit too much. So we launched in cans because we felt that cans were more environmentally friendly, which they are. We also felt that the trend was going to move to cans in craft. We felt, personally, I felt bottles were just old school, old man, ale kind of stuff. And I just like cans. As somebody who's a marketeer, I like the brandscape that you've got to work with a can versus a label. We always envisaged this sort of kind of heritage, sort of shimmery metallic feel in the product, which of course looks great on cans. It doesn't really work that well on bottles. But it was back in 2018, premium bottles were king, and especially the premium. Lots of on-trade perceived bottles as premium, cans as sort of retail. So that definitely made penetration in the on-trade more difficult. We also sort of predicted that craft lager was going to become a thing, which was probably the biggest challenge we set ourselves. Because back in 2018, IPA was king, and it still is king in the craft space. But we felt that there was a huge opportunity longer term in craft lager, that premium world lager space, which is massive, was going to see the premiumization effect, and a certain proportion, the top end of that market, would start to seek even higher quality and be curious about craft, which at that point was very much an ale drinker's terrain. So we went all guns blazing and we put craft lager in cans, which was like pushing water uphill in 2018. Now the interesting, that slope has changed. Craft lager now, I think, is the fastest growing space within craft. And all the things we thought would happen are starting to happen. Those premium lager drinkers are looking to premiumize further, looking for more sophisticated flavor profiles in lager, and that's what we cater to. So craft lagers were our first product, and then last year we launched an IPA. We would have launched that sooner, but COVID really arrived and just threw a spanner in pretty much everyone's plans.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you were in that sort of process around the whole COVID hitting, right? And did that take you back quite a bit? I mean, obviously there would have been huge challenges. How was that for you?
I mean, COVID was a weird one for us in that we didn't have much on-trade penetration at that time because we weren't in draft. And so we didn't take that massive hit through the closing of the on-trade, which I know lots of small regional brewers really depend on that regional on-trade. So we dodged that bullet. Also, at the same time, e-commerce took off, and we pivoted really hard to e-commerce, setting up an e-commerce platform through our website, getting on Amazon. And that was tremendous in terms of those COVID years. Our e-commerce took off, and we actually doubled our profits during the year doubled our turnover, should I say, during that COVID year, which I feel kind of guilty saying when so many brewers struggled. It was just our good fortune. We had, in fact, got very close to launching the lager in draft in 2020. Everything was lining up to launch sort of late spring, summer of 2020. And thankfully, COVID came when it did, and it didn't come, say, 2 months later, because I think if it had, it probably would have been the death of the business. We'd had a warehouse full of kegs with nowhere to sell them, and probably would have been the end of us. So we were probably a bit fortunate there, although it was frustrating at the time not to be able to go ahead with the draft launch. We quickly recognized that we were very lucky that, another bullet was dodged.
And so speaking of drafts, you are recently launching your draft into pubs. Is that right? Are you starting up in Scotland?
We are. This is big news. It's not really public yet, but happy to share it with you, Denise. That we're going to in September.
Yay.
We're going to be launching both our Genius IPA and our Genius Craft Lager in draft in September to coincide with the Rugby World Cup. Obviously, I'm big rugby fans, and beer tend to go hand in hand. We've ourselves always had a big association with the world of rugby through our partnership with Doddy Weir's Motor Neuron Disease Foundation, which we've been official partners of since day one for 5 years now. And we get 5p from every Genius beer goes to Doddy's Foundation. So we've got great brand awareness and a good affinity with the rugby community. So which is why we've timed the launch to coincide with the World Cup. We are going to launch in Scotland first because it's our home territory. It's just a bit more logistically easy. It's not because we see ourselves as a Scottish brand per se. We're a Scottish business, but Genius is not a Scottish brand. There's no Loch Ness Monsters, no Tarns, no Sporrans. People drink Genius because it tastes great and it's better for you. As simple as that. So we will be bringing it south of the border very soon. We think probably from October onwards, around London and south. You'll start to see Genius on draft available there.
That's an excellent achievement. How's that challenge been getting your beer on draft into pubs?
It's a big step up from being packaged. Really brewing and putting into cans is logistically not particularly challenging. As soon as you go to keg and all the world of draft installation and draft distribution, kegs, etc., you really are in the big boys league as a business. And that's something we're working with now. Fortunately, my colleague Charlie has a lot of experience of that from his time at Fine Ales. So we know what we're doing, but that doesn't make it any easier. Especially at these early days when we're just introducing the product, we're not yet really at scale. Hopefully over time we'll start to scale. We'll work with more distributors and that will get a bit more sort of bedded in. But it's a big step for the business.
You're part of a significant change in the community at the moment with the way people are drinking, as you mentioned, that healthier drinking approach. Um, how are you finding sort of customer response to your 3% beer? Do you get much feedback from people who are looking to moderate, cut back? What's the sort of feedback been on how people are enjoying your beers?
Yeah, it's the heart of what our brand and business is all about. The whole Genius Brewing business and our Genius brand is predicated on health and moderation. What's been frustrating for us in the last 5 years is that the consumer totally gets the product and has from day one. When people say, well, what's this Genius IPA? We say, well, it's a 3% low calorie IPA. And they're like,
Mhm.
oh, right. And then they drink it and they go, oh, and they're amazed by the flavor. They just go, oh my God, why is nobody doing this? Why has nobody done this before? And so that's great to hear, but it's also frustrating because sometimes, as I've said earlier, communicating to the trade have been difficult around the confusions around low and no. So the consumer response has been fantastic. It's people just get it straight away. Tastes good, less booze, less calories. What's not to like about that?
Yeah.
And so going to the on trade, I should also explain one of the reasons we chose 3% was we thought it was a bit of a magic number in terms of the actual alcohol content. It gives you flavor and body and for that alcohol effect that, let's face it, most drinkers want, but meaningfully less than a 5% beer. You took a 40% less alcohol than a 5% beer. But we also knew in our 330ml cans, 3% creates 1 unit of alcohol per serve. We really like the simplicity and transparency of that. So much so that it's right on the front of our cans. We were the first brand in the UK to put units and calories right on the front of the product and full nutrition on the back. So that 1 unit story has been a really, really strong part of our proposition in package. Obviously, when we go to draft, that will slightly change because we're going to 568 mils in a pint. But the 3% obviously doesn't change, and that'll be featured strongly on our keg badges. But we've just heard talking to so many people. I mean, one of the reasons we've been really frustrated about not getting draft out sooner was just customers saying to us, "Oh, can I get this in the pub? Can I get this in the pub?" And we said, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." And so that was frustrating as well because the demand was clearly there. And I speak to more and more pub goers now, especially. It's interesting. There's a lot of talk in the trade and the media about younger drinkers drinking less than, say, maybe my generation, which I'm sure they do. But I'm actually finding it's the classic Gen X generation, the kids in the 80s and 90s who, quite frankly, smashed it, who are now 45, 50. They're the ones who are really moderating, I think, really enthusiastically. And that's what we're seeing a lot. So it's not so much 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds who are embracing our product so much, we find. I think probably the hop profiles are a bit too sophisticated for probably many of them. It's a bit too bitter. But we're finding it's 45-year-olds who still love beer, particularly even more quality conscious now they're older, will invest in a quality product. They're the ones we're seeing who really are looking for healthier options, but don't want to sacrifice pleasure they get from great beer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. I think that there is so much talk, isn't there, about the millennials and they're not drinking much in universities, and it's true, and it's great that people are recognizing what's right for them. But I think it's our generation that sort of. I'm 43 myself, 44. I can't remember now. Is that's a thing that happens?
It's just finally getting old when you can't even remember how old you are.
Well, it was when I started cutting back, you don't really mention it very much because it's, like you say, that sort of 90s booze Britain that we all grew up with, just drinking loads is just the norm. It's just the standard. And it wasn't until I started saying to people, actually, do you know what? I'm not fancying drinking as much. I don't want to go out specifically to get drunk every time. That so many people turned around and went, oh my God, I feel the same. Oh, well, yeah, I'm trying to cut back, or I can't handle the hangovers as much, or I'd like a drink, but not too many. And I find that there's all this press about the younger generation, but actually no one's really talking about the fact that it is the people who are a bit older, who are a little bit wiser, perhaps, and who want, as you say, good quality products to enjoy themselves. And that enjoyment isn't just predicated on getting as drunk as possible.
Yeah, I think they've definitely seen that. That is our probably sweet spot market. People do say to us, who is your target customer? Is it those, moderating millennials? And on the whole, we'd say no. Yes, we see some customers in that space, but the vast majority, and we see this for our e-commerce, where we obviously can have that, close relationship with the customer. I would say 40 plus, male and female. Interestingly, female, about 30% of our e-commerce customers are women, which I think for beer brands, a huge proportion. That I think that's interesting. We meet a lot of women who say, I would like to like beer, but I find it too bitter, or I'm too find it too strong or too calorific. And Genius suddenly seems to be, tick all their boxes. Also, there's something in our lighter flavor profile. And I would love to say this was brilliant brewing on our behalf, but it's no, it's just a little bit good luck. That our lighter flavor profile does seem to work better with the female palate than full fat IPAs, etc. So there's a health profile that seems to work with that market, but also the Genius flavor profile seems to really work. So the female market, sort of 35, 40 plus is big market for us. But if I had to draw, what's my typical customer? It's a 45-year-old lawyer who's busy at work, got some kids, doesn't have much spare time, probably used to play a lot of sport when he's younger, used to drink probably quite a lot of beer when he's younger, doesn't have time for either now, but wants to try and keep fit, try and keep that middle-aged spread at bay, but won't compromise on the beer experience. And for these guys, some of them will drink no alcohol beers, but so many of them have said to us, I just can't go there. It just doesn't deliver what I want.
So, it could be said that yours is somewhat of a gateway beer.
Gateway drug to being healthier. Yeah. I think it's just it's that spectrum now. I think there's such a good range for people now. There wasn't 5-10 years ago that moderation meant having a Coke or having a not very pleasant zero beer. Now there's the options of much better tasting zero beers. There are more sophisticated soft drinks coming out now that are not so sugary. And now we're seeing the emergence of this lower ABV light beer, which is giving people, I would say, probably the best of both. They're still getting that full beer experience, but they know they're shaving off the calories, shaving off the booze.
One of my passions is that it's about bringing to people that they have options and that they have choices, and that it's not an all or nothing thing. Because quite often when the conversation is had about moderating or cutting back or just drinking less for any length of time, the response that some people can be met with is, well, if you're thinking about cutting back, then you need to give up. If you're thinking that you need to drink less, then you have an issue and that you should, stop drinking. And I think
weird. That's like saying, I want to lose weight, therefore I must be obese.
yes, it's a world of extremes. I find for some.
And I think we should talk about the phrase mindful drinking as well, because I've seen an evolution in the understanding of that phrase from when we first began our journey. When I first met the club soda guys, quite early on, it wasn't mindful drinking was, I think, regarded as what we now talk about as moderation, being mindful of what you're drinking. But at some point over the last 5 years, I've seen a change where that mindful drinking is now basically regarded as what I would call teetotalism. And so I see emails and blogs from some sort of mindful drinking types, and they're just talking about sobriety. It's, and I think that's not helpful, because that's not drinking. That's no different from having a soft drink. It's not drinking. In Britain, we regard drinking in the word alcohol. So I think that's not helped people, because a lot of people are interested in this notion of mindful drinking, being more thoughtful, more mindful, more careful at what I'm drinking in regard to alcohol, to that moderation of thing. If you're saying to them, oh, mindful drinking means having no more alcohol, like, I'm not up for that. I think it's a disincentive for moderation, because you're asking people to go from here all the way to here. And most of us in this space, who quite frankly like a bit of alcohol, I don't want to go to this place. Can I not be in the middle of it, please?
Absolutely. I think you're right there. I think that there needs to be an understanding that most people, one of the recent stats I've come across is that 77% of Brits now moderate their drinking, whether that be in the same session or within a week, that's the same number of people that choose to drink alcohol weekly. So it's becoming more of just a norm that people will be looking to have times when they drink less. But that doesn't mean that everybody who chooses to drink less wants to go and become teetotal or needs to. Obviously, there are extremes and situations where people do need to take steps and care, and they should absolutely. I think it's so much room for understanding that life is not, as I said before, extremes, that there is space in between for people to make choices.
Yeah. And I think also people's behavior around alcohol is getting more nuanced as well. So, my father's generation probably drank the same beer every pub, every occasion, because it wasn't a choice. I think now people drink not just the product they choose is around the occasion and location of their drinking. Is it a Friday night, Saturday night, or is it a Wednesday night, or is it a Sunday lunchtime? Where am I? Am I at home, or I'm in the pub with my mates, or is it football, or I'm with the family in a little cafe? So I think that the occasion of our drinking is very much now affecting the choice of product we're going with. Genius is a classic moderation option. Can you enjoy a good Saturday night at Genius? Absolutely. Watch a couple of games of World Cup rugby back to back and still be standing at the end of it. But equally, I totally understand, because I'm that person too. Sometimes Saturday night is Saturday night, and I'm tucking into the Brew Dogs and the Stallers because that's where I'm at. So I think as we've given consumers more range and more choice in the beer space, that has met their more sophisticated sort of desire for what they're drinking, how they want to drink, and what sort of products.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about, we've given them the range, we've given them the options. We now need to give people the support to be able to say, make these choices that are best for you at that time. Like you say, whether it's a Friday, Saturday night in the pub, or a sunny afternoon picnic, and on what you feel is best for you then.
I think that's been the challenge until recently. The zero beers have been so bad that it's not really much of a choice. No, they've got much better. So at least the flavor experience is better, but it's still a no alcohol experience. And for many of us, the occasion is something we associate with alcohol. A Sunday lunch in the pub, it's lovely with a pint or two, isn't it? It's just part of the joy of it sometimes. Or having a friend round for a bit of dinner of a Wednesday evening. Yeah, you might want a couple of glasses of wine, but do you want a 15% Rioja? Not really. Would you maybe have a 10 or 11% wine? And I think we haven't talked about wine because it's not really our world, but I think we're going to start to see ABV in wine getting much more cognizant in people's choices, because it makes a big difference.
I was going to ask you actually your thoughts on sort of the sector and the industry, and how you see things changing based on your experience over the last 5 years and what's happened. The wines is one thing, isn't it? There's the emergence. I've noticed a couple more brands coming out now that are sort of mid-range alcoholic wines. And obviously,
Again, I'm not a wine person, so I don't want to claim any authority in this space. But what I understand is that zero wines just don't work. They're grape juice. They don't have the body that you need, especially in reds. They just don't seem to work. And that there's a recognition that alcohol has an even bigger part to play in the wine experience than probably the beer experience, which I understand. And so, yeah, if you can have an 8%, 9% red wine, rosé white wine that gives you that middle ground, best of both, and I can see that attractive to wine drinkers.
yeah. And what are your thoughts on the beer and ale low and no alcohol market going forward? You've obviously made a few predictions when you started about the craft market and the cans. Do you have any other crystal ball insights?
I think we can't underestimate the impact of the new reduction in alcohol duty on the 3.4 and below ABV. I think we're already seeing industry response to that in reformulation of well-established brands. We're seeing NPD in that space. It can't be often the government has instantly created a segment in the alcohol space. They've literally, the stroke of the HMRC pen, they are creating a new segment in the beer space, particularly. All designed around getting people to drink less, drink lower strength beer. given we have a cost of living crisis where people are getting more cost sort of mindful on the product they buy, it's an opportunity to save duty for some products. Although interestingly, I noticed Carlsberg have reduced the ABV of their Danish Pilsner down to 3.4 from 3.8. Yeah, they're not cutting the price. Interesting. I suspect we'll see all their sort of category competitors do exactly the same. So if the chancellor was looking for a price incentive to get people to drink lower ABV, this industry's not quite delivered on that. But I understand the commercial opportunity that they've taken. But more importantly, I think longer term, suddenly now a well-known beer like Carlsberg has got a 3.4% on it. I think it shifts the paradigm and the mindset of the consumer that you can have a mass volume beer that people know and love in that 3.5% range. And it doesn't seem like it's a what, it's so that I think is really going to change a great deal. I think it's a trigger for the whole coming to life of this light beer and lower ABV space is going to really take off now. I think we're going to see, if you ask me for predictions, I think we'll see Carlsberg, Foster's do exactly the same. Sorry, not Carling, Foster's do exactly the same as Carlsberg. I think they'll go to 3.4%. And I think there'll be a bit of pretty brutal competition on price in that space. It'll be interesting to see what the more world-known, like Amstel, for instance, and Prava, 4% beers, how do they respond? I think will be interesting. I suspect they'll keep their 4% ABV and they will position themselves as like premium 4%. So we'll see a bit of a schism between all those guys who were fighting in that 4% space 2 years ago. I think we're going to see a bit of a schism here where a handful of big brands will go lower. And then I think we'll see a smaller handful of slightly more premium 4%ers try and hold that position as being premium to what were their previous competitors. That's what I think will happen in that space, which is interesting. More to our space, around about 3%, the craft, I think there's no doubt about it. We're seeing the craft space waking up to the opportunities around lower ABV over the last couple of years. The rise of the session IPA, it's been huge, isn't it? In fact, it's almost like everyone's kind of realized, okay, 6.5% IPA, it's not really the great commercial proposition, is it? Because how many of those are you going to drink? Yeah. So I think we've seen session IPAs in that 4%, 4.5%, or even 3.8 to 4.5 space. That has really grown in the last few years. And I think is rapidly becoming normalized, actually, assisted by the huge growth in neck oil. Neck oil is just going mad now, isn't it? Now it's got Heineken behind it, and it's a 4.3% session IPA. So it's taking IPA to a really huge audience, but in an audience that maybe hadn't drunk it before, and they're experiencing it for the first time as a 4.3% beer, not a 6.3% beer. So I think that's doing a great deal for sort of moving the goalposts about what the consumer associates craft quality with and ABV, because we've always been quite upset about this idea that if something isn't really strong, it can't be a great craft beer, which was definitely the mindset not long ago. It still is the mindset of some craft aficionados who, think ABV equals quality. That is breaking down pretty quickly now. And there's some great products out there that are lower in ABV and still give you a great craft beer flavor.
Well, speaking of predictions and future, what's next for Genius then? So you've got your ale and your lager. By the way, I'd still love to know, tell me a bit more about the flavor profiles of each of those.
Yes, I realize here we are. We've talked extensively about the industry, the segment, the trends. I haven't probably talked too much about the product.
So look, tell me a bit more about you and about Genius. So what do they taste like? What I thought was really interesting what you were saying earlier on about your market share and being 30% female and that flavor profile, because I myself, before I started cutting back on my drinking, didn't really drink a lot of IPAs. I'd have a lager, I'm fine with that, but there's that bitterness that you were mentioning that can be quite off-putting. And I don't know why that's a male, female, gender palate thing, but
I think it just is. I think the female palate in general is a little bit sweeter.
So, what's different about Genius in terms of the way it tastes? Why you think that might be more appealing?
Well, for our lager to start with, the word craft is itself a very highly sort of debated semantic kind of area that gets some people very excited. Uh,
Yes.
we don't get too excited about it. When people say to us, what makes Genius beers a craft beer? We say one word: quality. They taste great. And there's a sophistication to the flavor profile that is instantly recognizable as a superior product. So for instance, in our lager, we have 4 different hops in our lager, including Cascade and Citra. So we get this really nice citrusy profile and a really bit of hoppy finish that you wouldn't necessarily get off a mainstream world lager. So if we're going to call ourselves a craft lager, for instance, we think we don't just have to be good, we have to be good and better. Anyway, so what I mean by that is different. So there's a sophistication in the hop profile that is just more nuanced than you would get even in a high quality premium lager, and that's becomes from the 4 hops we use. So there's definitely an alienness to our lager that is a little bit unexpected, but we think that gives it a really interesting sort of flavor profile. And what we get, interesting enough, because we only had the lager for the first 3 or 4 years of the business, quite a few ale drinkers would try it. And we're always very surprised how much they liked. A lot of them, I don't drink lager, I'm an ale guy, and hear that a lot. And then they drink our lager, they go, oh, that's not what I expected. Because there is a citrusy hoppiness to the lager that is definitely different. The IPA, I think, is probably a bit more classic in the profile. It's Mosaic, Simcoe, Citra hops, classic sort of trio of hops for IPA, which gives it that really nice kind of grapefruity, slightly mangoey fruitiness in the middle that's there. There's a bitterness on the end, definitely. But, we're talking IBU about 30, 25 to 30. So definitely less than a big, strong IPA. So there's a lightness to our IPA that I think appeals to people who are just looking for that lighter palate experience. The flavor profile is what they recognize as classic IPA, but everything is just that little bit more light, a little bit more subtle, and definitely very Moorish. One thing we haven't talked about is the session thing. Yes, session IPA is become a really big thing. We don't use the word session around our beers particularly. Are Genius beers great for a session? Yeah, they're fantastic for a session. Of course they are. They're 3% ABV. But we don't really use that language around a product because we don't think that lower ABV has to mean you have more of them. It doesn't have to be a session.
Yeah.
You can have 1, you can have 2, and it gives you what you want. So I think that's a little bit something that the craft space needs to think about when we talk about lower ABV products and using the word session, because to me, that doesn't speak to moderation, which is where a lot of people are looking for. So that's something the industry, I think, needs to just think about a bit more.
Well, it's definitely a beneficial marketing term, isn't it? If it's sessionable, then, you need to buy the cases of 12 and 24 because each time you drink some, you're going to have, several.
Just definitely. I mean, yes, I would absolutely say Genius beers are very sessionable, but we don't particularly talk about being a session beer because I think, as I said, I think the health and moderation message is central to what we're about, and sessions aren't usually very healthy.
Absolutely.
But who doesn't love a session?
And so what about what's up next for you guys? So tell me a little bit about any future plans. And I appreciate you've already given us or I've already taken the exclusive of the draft. Yeah, what is going on for you guys?
Draft is the big thing for us in terms of new products, definitely, and the new market, which is really exciting. I think bigger picture, as I said, we're a Scottish-based business, growing our customer base north of the border just because it's simply easier. But we've always thought that Genius is a great product for the wider UK market, and taking the Genius product and brand down into England, particularly the South, it's always been top of our agenda longer term. We think there's a great customer demographic for the product. We've just brought on a brand development partner in London and the South, which we're just starting to sort of get working with now. It's literally sort of right now. So there's going to be much more activity happening in London, the South, with the products, draft being the sort of catalyst for that. We feel we can bring something for the on-trade. We can bring package to retail as well. So that's our market ambitions for the next 2 or 3 years, is to really take the product to every pub and every high street across the UK, but particularly, I think, through the south of England.
before I let you go, because believe it or not, we've almost done an hour already.
Right.
So before I let you go, just two more things. Well, maybe three more. You mentioned briefly a foundation that I believe you are a very big supporter of. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks very much. I've been so closely involved with this that sometimes I actually forget about it, which is a bit crazy. So the My Name's Doddy Foundation was launched by the late Doddy Weir OBE back in 2017 after he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. For those who are not sort of rugby fans, Doddy played 61 times for Scotland and was a 1997 British Lion, played for Newcastle Falcons in England, as well as Maoris in Scotland. Much loved character. Doddy died of MND last year, having had it for 6 years. I was at school with Doddy and played rugby with him. And my wife's father died of MND. So it's a cause that is very close to our hearts. And as a business, when Charlie and I were conceiving Genius Brewing, we always wanted to have a really strong CSR agenda, but it'd be fair to say that we didn't really know what that might be. There's so many good causes out there. How do you choose? And then Doddy announced his diagnosis and the launch of his foundation, and that was a no-brainer for us. I should also point out that Charlie's brother-in-law is Rob Wainwright, who is also a former Scotland player who played with Doddy and played the British Lions with Doddy. So there was just this obvious connection to that world. And so we got straight on it through Doddy and through Jill Douglas at the foundation. And Doddy used to wear the number 5 jersey in rugby. So we thought, well, let's give 5p for every beer to Doddy's foundation. And that's not 5% of profits or 5p of profits. It's 5p right off the top, out of our pocket, which seemed really simple, but probably hadn't really thought about the margins in beer enough at that point. I thought, that's quite a lot of money. But I'm delighted it is. And the foundation has grown hugely. I think it'd be fair to say, if you ask Doddy, he never imagined it was going to be the thing it's become. The profile with him winning, the Heather Ronson Award at Sports, Spotty Awards. The whole profile of it has gone huge, which is transforming the awareness of MND, the amount of fundraising for MND. So that's been a wonderful thing to be part of. Although Doddy's no longer with us, our partnership with the foundation will be forever. That was always, we knew that day would come when Doddy wasn't going to be with us anymore, but it was never in doubt as to the longevity of our relationship.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. It's obviously very close to your heart. So another wonderful reason for people to go out and to get to know more about you guys and help with the foundation.
And we're very proud to have his foundation's logo on and
So one of the things I do try to ask everyone that I speak to is to share the love. Because for me, for Low No Drinker magazine, as I mentioned before, it's about letting people know that there is choice out there for the times that they choose to drink less for whatever reasons. So I like to pose a question to everyone I speak to, which is that if you were on your way out for the evening, or you're off to a friend's house or a barbecue, and you're choosing to drink less, whether that be a lower or 0%, what's your favorite go-to beer or wine or spirit in that sort of area that you would be choosing for the night?
Well, obviously, it's not hard to find what my own. I think there's not many beers in this lower ABV light space, and that's been really the problem. And there's so few products, and we've found when talking to retailers that they don't know how to benchmark us, because they don't really know what else is in the space, because there is so little. So while there's lots of choice in the no alcohol space, and I must confess, I'm not a no alcohol beer drinker. It just reminds me of what I'm not having, if you know what I mean. But I hear that Heineken Zero is really good. I hear Guinness Zero apparently is incredibly good. And I think the Erdinger Weiss beer, I've also heard for quite a long time, had much more body and mouth feel than the Zero beers that were around 2 or 3 years ago. So I've heard from lots of people telling us that those are doing really well. Beers like Genius, the obvious one is small beer. The guys down in small beer produce really nice beers in that space. Their ABVs are a bit more eclectic than ours. One of the big points about Genius, all our products are 3% and always will be, because we just think it's the magic number, and we like that consistency across the brand. So anyone who has a Genius Lager or an IPA, whatever our next product is, they'll know it's 3%. I know the small beer guys, their range is a bit more eclectic, between about 1% and 2.8, but they make great liquid. But there's not really, that's the problem.
Yeah.
There's not really much out there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will change. I think that there is definitely space in the market for others to come alongside you and show that there is a range here. And I think that with the way things are going at the moment and the huge shift in what's available and drinking habits over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I do think there is room for more like you who are saying, look, you can have something that's not 0%, not full strength, sits somewhere nicely in the middle and serves that purpose for you. So I think there will be.
I completely agree, Denise. I'm delighted that you see it that way too. And I think not just that, I think that space is going to become its own ecosystem as well. So there's not going to be a one product fits all kind of space, because we know consumers have different price points, different flavor profiles they're looking for. So I think in this light beer space, which I think is going to settle out between about 2.5 and 3.4. 3.4 will definitely be the ceiling because of the duty break. But I think we'll see products in that 2.5 to 3.4 space. But within that, we're going to see a range of styles and a range of price points. We're going to see the big house names bring their products into that segment and drive down price, which is good, because there's always, I really think it's important there's an affordable option for everyone who wants to moderate. But equally, I think we're going to see a premium end in this segment. Brands like Genius, like Small Beer, who are doing really high quality beers that are still in this lighter, healthier space. So hopefully there's a flavor profile and there's a price point for everyone.
Absolutely. Jason, it has been wonderful talking to you. Before I let you go, can you tell people where they can go to find out more about you, to buy your fabulous beers? Where can they find you?
I would say that obviously come to geniusbrewing.com. You can find out all about us. Obviously, you can buy through the website. All our products are available through the website in 12 packs, 24 packs, and there's some nice little mixed packs with some doddy cups and things like that as well. They make nice gifts. Amazon, of course, everything's on Amazon, and we are too. So many people just have the Amazon app on their phone. Well, when you're next to Amazon, just throw in a 12 pack of Genius as well, and it comes, obviously next day free with Amazon. So that's the easiest place to get us. Hopefully over the next year or so, you'll see us in more and more bars across the country, and there's opportunity to enjoy a pint of Genius.
Fantastic. And on the social media, do you prefer people to find you on LinkedIn or Instagram or anything like that?
All of those, Twitter or X, I believe. I can't bring myself to say.
I have no idea. Can't get my head around that one yet.
What is the verb to X someone? So yeah, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you'll find lots of content. We're very active on there. Also on LinkedIn too. So you should be able to find us. Stick Genius in your browser and you'll find lots of stuff.
Fantastic. And then what I'll do is I'll put all of those links for people in the show notes and the captions and everything below hand so people can find you. Jason, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, Denise, thanks for the opportunity.
That's it for this episode of the Low No Drinker Magazine podcast. A huge thank you to Jason Clark from Genius Brewing for spending some time with me today. If you enjoyed meeting Jason and would like to hear from other low and no alcohol brand founders, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you'd like some more information, head on over to the website at www.lownodrinkermagazine.com, where you can find the show notes for this episode and all the others. Thanks everyone. Happy listening.